With infinite complaisance, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
On this episode of iNTO the FRAY, I welcome Brennan Storr and Brandon Schexnayder, and they are of the brand new Fear Daily podcast. It is written by Brennan. He is the creator of the Ghost Story Guys, and Brandon is the host, and he is the creator of Southern Gothic. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us, Shannon.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's good to be back.
So, before we describe exactly what Fear Daily entails, besides the fact that it does, in fact, air daily, which is amazing, can you guys go into more depth about, of course, who you are, besides the little snippets that I've already provided?
Well, Brennan, do you want to go first? Yeah, you've been on the show before, right?
Oh, yeah, they know me, man. You go ahead.
All right.
I say they know me. That is like wildly overstating my importance to everyone, but I'm just like, yeah, you go first.
Well, we'll warn you guys. Brennan and I have a little bit of a bromance going now after working so closely together. So as we trip over each other and talk about this stuff. But no, I'm Brandon Schexnayder. I'm the host of Southern Gothic. It's a podcast. It's a narrative show. It's scripted, researched. We do all the dark history, old mysteries, legends, folklore, and of course, ghost stories of the American South. Things like the Bell Witch, places like Waverly Hills, all of that. And we really like to take old legends that I joke, it's like, what's the stuff your mama told you growing up? And we're going to go research it and do a good history documentary on it. And of course, it's got a spooky vibe, right? But I'm New Orleans born and raised, based out of Nashville now. So I am I was joking a little while ago, I definitely have quite a bit of Cajun and hillbilly all mixed together here. So Southerner by birth for sure. But that's Southern Gothic. Yeah. So check it out.
So right off the bat, Brandon, what do you think of the Bell Witch story, tale, encounters?
Well, I am extra fascinated about it. We were just down there last month. I took my 10-year-old down there, which is, look, you do this for a living, right? And your kids end up a little weird too. She has to go up to the cave. It's about an hour north of us here. And, I think the cave itself is a bit of a tourist trap and doesn't really have much. So if you are visiting, it's really cool to go, but it's probably not as kind of a haunted tourist destination. I think that's kind of an add-on. But the original story, I mean, it is fascinating. And it is fascinating to the point of beyond what you expect when you get into the research. It is so highly documented of a story from when it originally even came out. It's not something that it's not one of these things where, in the 60s, some hillbilly mama was telling their kid the story about a haunted house down the street. And the next thing you know, it ends up on Discovery Channel, right? It's not a legend like that. This was in the newspapers, in the community, as early as when it was going on, and everybody knew about it. So it has this depth to that story that is like nowhere else you can imagine. Who the witch is and what's going on with all of that, I honestly, I think it is a poltergeist. I think it falls into that kind of paranormal activity. Now, if you're, if you look at it from the way it acts and all those things, if you feel like it is the poltergeist and it is attached to the witch, they say it was her neighbor or their neighbor, right? It was old Kate Batts, which was somebody that they were having a land dispute with up there, and they were in Adams, Tennessee. And they say she was the one that was causing all these problems. And I mean, you guys, you've heard the poltergeist stories from all over before. The link there, I don't know. I don't know what that's like. I don't think she wasn't even dead yet, actually, when this went on. But yet that's how a lot of people tell the story now. But it acts like a poltergeist. It has that kind of feel to it. And if you do air, I always tell people how I treat my show. So treat it historically. I actually don't go too far into the believing all the way. I want to go kind of down the middle and talk about the history, where it's not that we're skeptical that these things don't happen, but we want to just outline how the legend might have gotten bigger. And so, it also has this very, very easy through line, like a lot of these poltergeist stories, that the young girl, the daughter, was having problems there. And as most of y'all would know, a lot of that poltergeist activity comes from that energy of young teen girl, right? It seems to feed off of that type of thing. And Betsy Bell was certainly the center of the story. So it's fascinating. It is such a fascinating tale. And I mean, right this time of year, they're actually having a big festival up there in Adams on the weekends to tell the story and kind of celebrate it. It is the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, where the cave is for sure. They are in the middle of the nowhere still.
I just love that they embrace it. They're smart about it. It brings tourists in, it brings money in. So that's the right way to do it. A lot of places, they shy away from that kind of thing. Have you guys ever thought, if you could, of course, for me, it'd be a witch. For you, you'd be a warlock, right? Have you ever thought about if you could attain powers such as that would, you could vanquish foe or make them sick at the very least, or draw riches your way? Would you go that direction and be like, yeah, I'll do that?
Oh, I'm signing already. I'm signing right now.
Brett and I just had this conversation with Paul on Ghost Story Guys yesterday.
Really?
Where, I'm pretty well, a similar story where we were kind of joking about something. And I was like, oh, don't worry. This is going to work. I just sold my soul last night.
Yeah, if you want, I'll sell it twice. I'll double mortgage my soul. We'll go underwater on that mortgage. I don't care.
You can reverse mortgage your soul today.
Speaking of refi,
yeah,
double down. Hell, bring it on. That makes you wonder. Yeah, I just had a really interesting show about shapeshifters on a reservation, and these are the big dogs that can do, not only can they do that, but you shoot them and then sometimes they heal, sometimes they don't. And you kind of go, what's going to happen to you later on, if you get to that later on, because these are the ones that have really gone full on to the dark side.
Shannon, the amount of chicken wings I eat, I don't know how much later on I have, so I'm not too worried about
it. Get to the fire and brimstone that much sooner, right? Let's just get this going.
That's it. Rent will be cheaper at the very least.
Get that bucket of water and shove your feet right in there. Get that cat stare going on. All right, so Brandon, also, you are a ghost guide and a folklorist, right? Officially.
Kinda. I do ghost tours. I work with a company. A friend of mine owns a company. I never thought I would be a tour guide. It was never something, as a kid, I grew up in New Orleans. So as a kid, I always thought that was the coolest gig ever, but, never pursued that. I went into music early in my career. I was an audio engineer. And after starting the podcast, it was 2018 or so, and we got deep into it. My sister's an archivist by trade, so she's a researcher down at the Louisiana State Museum. And that's how we really moved into this history realm of the paranormal rather than, the research. I joke, we're more the library type than the kind of being up all night, somewhere. And we, so after doing that, a friend of mine started a tour company here in Franklin, Tennessee. And it's just south of Nashville. It is the place where there was a Civil War battle. They call it the Gettysburg of the South because over 4 hours, the battle lasted 4 hours. You had 10,000 people died, went missing, or were wounded. 4 hours. So just massive casualties. A big deal. It was right at the end of the war, right after the Battle of Atlanta. And so there's a lot of stuff in this little town, and it's a very touristy town. It's a beautiful little southern main street. And my friend started doing ghost tours, and I was involved in doing this work already. And it was just such a natural fit that as she was scaling her business, she's like, do you want to come on as well? And I tell every podcaster, every person who is in some type of public speaking type role, man, there is no training for telling stories, no training for learning how to write stories or anything else than getting up and standing in front of people night after night, telling ghost stories and being able to interact with them, right? Like seeing their faces, seeing what their questions are, seeing what's important to people and hearing about the paranormal, hearing about what goes on there, and it was something that's really advanced the way that I look at the paranormal because I've been able to interact with people at that point in time, not via email, not through, calls or anything, but I get what we might call normies, right? People who are just in town and they're like, oh, let's go on the ghost tour. And then they have these fascinating insights into something you say. And it drastically changed how I research. It drastically changed how I tell stories. You're trying to keep people captivated on the street at like 8:30 at night and tell this story. and you're like, you have them engrossed, and you're standing in front of this haunted place, and you're ready to give them the payoff of the story, and all of a sudden a motorcycle drives by, and you like, and your story's ruined, and you have to learn how to get back to it and re-engage them and get so you can get the payoff and you can get that engagement. So it's something that now at this point in my career, I've actually moved a lot of what we do on Southern Gothic into this space that is a little more haunted tourism than history now. I feel like there's this power of place that comes with stuff. I think that, a lot of times I try to explain to non-believers, have you ever just walked into a historic building and it just feels like the walls talk to you? Just because you're there, just because you know the history, like let's take it one step further and talk about, the paranormal from there. And that's been a massive shift, and I think a unique opportunity for me to gain new perspective on the kind of work we all do.
Now, do you guys have any possible spirit interaction on these tours?
Sometimes there's a couple locations that, people will feel things. There's this one spot that the owners, it's a notoriously haunted spot, and the owners let people come up and stand on the porch. And very frequently you get people who get that just overcome with anxiety. And you might have people, like just break into tears and stuff like that. It's our main spot in terms of that. Sometimes it is notorious for pictures of what might look like images in the windows of somebody looking out. I'm a little skeptical of that part because it's the old 200-year-old wavy windows. And I think that a lot of times folks, just kind of, want to see something there. What the encounters that folks have on the porch, though, sometimes can get really chilling, and people hearing like voices and things like that. So there is a spot like that. There's another spot here, an old Masonic hall that it's not open to the public. It's a Masonic hall that is still, it was built back in, I believe, I'm a little rusty on it. I want to say 1821, somewhere around the 1820s. And that particular spot has been a Masonic hall its entire duration. There's still, those old upper class men, like, in and out of that building, like the Boy Scouts in there. And has this vast history. And that place is just chock full of stuff. If you get a chance to go in, every once in a while, they'll bring us in for tours. I mean, there have been apparitions cited by folks. There've been a lot of disembodied sounds, things like that. We've had a psychic come on the tour. A local psychic comes sometimes, and and she'll kind of walk us through some of the things on these 3 floors. And that place is probably the most active spot if you can gain admittance. And it's kind of a tour either gets lucky or they don't. There might be somebody there that day that just says, "Hey, y'all, come on in," or there might not be, because it's working. If you call it that Masonic hall, it's still a Masonic hall.
Now, did you want to mention the name of that tour, Brandon? You don't have to, of course.
Oh, I didn't name. Well, I should plug it, huh? If you come down to Franklin,
Heck yeah.
It's called Franklin Walking Tours. I'm sorry, Alicia, the owner. Here I am telling about her tour, telling the secrets. Yeah, Franklin Walking Tours. It's called the Grim and Ghostly Tour. I mean, they're ramping up here with 2 tours a night right now during Halloween season. So come down, and if you are in the Franklin area, we have this wonderful event at the end of the year that they put on at our old historic cemetery, where it's the last weekend on October 26th, where they have costumed actors stand next to headstones at this cemetery and tell stories about who's in there. And so it's a cool little town, a cool little tourist town too, Franklin.
I will be sure to link that. Yeah, the history out there is certainly dark, very sad. I'm sure there's some lighter stories along the way too, but I agree with the whole pareidolia thing, right, Brandon? I mean, that comes up quite a bit. I see it in the ghost groups on Facebook quite a bit. So, I mean, unless you see it with your own eyeballs and then it waves a transparent hand at you. Other than that, it's kind of tough to go off of that solely.
Right. Look, it gets people excited though, and I appreciate that part.
Yes.
It gets folks who are coming, it's like, I mean, I've seen stuff at some of these places, but it gets people excited and it makes them more interested in the topic. And I think for whatever it's worth, it's good for that.
Well, Brennan did say that he needs no introduction, but just in case. I mean, I'll start a little bit because Brennan is the one that when he was in Vegas, he begged me, because he is such a huge Zach Bagans fan, that he had to go to the museum. And he said, listen, I don't care if you're working. I don't care if you're nearly dead. We're going to go because I heard that he might actually be there.
I remember it happening exactly that way. It's like you're playing back a transcript.
Yeah, I wouldn't lie. Why would I make this up?
No, it's not at all.
It's too good to be true, right? No, but honestly,
his autograph, Brennan.
He tackled him and got tased. You know.
Yeah. I got a kiss.
No, we really did go to the museum, though. He didn't beg me, though. He has other maybe opinions about Zach, but we did have interesting things happen there. And I think Brennan would agree that no matter what you think of Zach, the museum is pretty badass. His collection is pretty amazing, and it was a lot of fun. So Brennan, now that I've gotten that out of the way, you know, I was waiting for that. I got to rib you every time that you're on because that was just too good.
That's fair.
Us and Peggy, she whispering your name, Brennan. You know, I won't go through that story again, but
I still don't know about that whole thing. That's we won't get into it. But I'm still mixed on like was that a work? I don't know. I just don't know.
It was interesting though because the tour guide did after we exited the room. She's like, "Did you hear like a Brandon, Brent?" We're like, "This guy over here, his name's Brennan," but you know, who knows? But it was fun either way. I was waiting for an attachment, but I never get those. They don't give a crap about me. So.
And my life is far too depressing. So I'm kidding.
All right. So for those that don't maybe somehow know you, Brennan, let's hear a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So in full disclosure, I said I need no introduction mostly because I had a feeling I was going to spend the rest of the show talking over Brandon. And I thought, let's I'll step out of the way as much as I can. Yeah. I'm the host of the Ghost Story Guys podcast. I co-host it with Paul Bestel of Mysteries and Monsters. I've been doing that since 2017. Which it's crazy to think about. We're coming up on, I guess, our 8th year, something like that, on January 17th. It was actually because of my coming on to Into the Fray to promote my book, A Strange Little Place, that we launched the show early in 2017 because, you know, you were going to be having me on in February of that year. And so I said to my co-host at the time, I said, we got to get this thing out the door so we can say, hey, go check out my podcast. So really Into the Fray, like for me, Into the Fray and Ghost Story Guys are very, very closely tied in my mind.
I guess I didn't realize that, Brennan.
Oh yeah. I think this is one of the last interviews I did for Strange. And obviously, you know, a big show. I've been a fan for a long time. And I was like, oh man, we gotta, if we're going to do this, we got to do this right. We got to do this now. And that's why the first episode is, well, it's what it is. It's the first episode of a podcast. But so I've been doing that, like I say, 7 years. I've been doing it full time since the end of 2020. And I'm the author of A Strange Little Place, The Paranormal Secrets of Revelstoke, British Columbia, which is a collection of the real life paranormal history of my small mountain town in Western Canada, my small mountain hometown. Yeah, that originally came out in 2016 and then was republished by Beyond the Fray in 2022 in an expanded second edition. And actually the audiobook version of that is finally going out at the end of this week or beginning of next week to Amazon. So you'll be able to hear the audiobook version of A Strange Little Place. And essentially what we do over on Ghost Story Guys, we tell true life stories of the paranormal. So every episode is usually themed around something. We just did The Haunting of Serbia on 197. We just had Brandon on. We did Ghosts of Atlanta. It'll be 198. They'll be coming out next week. And then every other week we've started doing a mail show. So with the mail show is called Talk Spooky to Me, and that's either us answering listener mail or we will have a guest on to chat about something they're doing. So we've had author Luke Phillips on to talk about his fantastic Sasquatch action horror novel Rogue, which, guys, if you haven't read Rogue, read Rogue. And then recently we had the filmmakers John Adams and Toby Poser on from the Addams Family to talk about their new film Hellhole. So we sort of try to have a wide range of guests on when we do have guests. And really that's kind of what I do. I also do a little bit of editing on the side. I produce Folklore for Luke Greensmith, which is a folklore show out of the UK. I produce Mysteries and Monsters for Paul. And now I write Fear Daily with Brandon.
And you don't sleep, obviously.
Yeah. No, I sleep a lot. I just don't have much of a social life.
I knew you were a vampire. I didn't see you in any daylight while you were here, so there you go.
Oh, dude, honestly, I've been more able to focus on work stuff, well, to a certain degree, since I've been back here on the West Coast because our apartment is so dark. The little place I live in London, Ontario, where I spend most of my time, it's in this terrifying building in a not great part of town, and it's in the top corner. So I get nothing but sunlight all the time, and I cannot focus in the sunlight to save my life. I was never so happy as when I found an underground gym recently. It's an underground 24-hour gym. It's perfect. I go down there, it's like a casino. I don't know what time of day it is, and I've never been happier.
Or buffer.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking good, Bren.
Dang.
Oh, thank you very much.
Not all bad things happen underground in pits, see?
Oh, I mean that part. I hit the wall during the pandemic, man. I got so heavy. I was about 300 pounds, a little over 300 pounds, and my health had gone to crap. My feet were real bad, so I moved to Montreal. Actually, some friends went to Montreal. I went out with them, and I started working with a nutritionist. Started working with a trainer. Actually, taking all that stuff seriously for the first time in my life. Because I'd always kind of skated by. I was hefty, but never that hefty. And then you just hit that wall, right? And you realize, okay, I'm coming up on. At that point, I was coming up on 40, and I thought, oh boy, I got to fix this. And I got to fix this now because this is going to be a real problem soon if I don't. So, and then I found the underground gym, and really everything kind of came together.
If that's code word for something, we can talk about it off air. It's fine, bro. No,
the first thing about underground gym is you don't talk about underground gym.
That's right. You don't want to know what goes on there. No, everything they say that's going to happen in your 40s that they've been telling you your whole life, you're like, that's not going to happen to me. Oh, it'll happen. You just wait. All that is real.
Oh man,
and it's terrifying.
There's a little here in Victoria. There's a little divot in the bed. And sometimes it's just where my knee has been pressed into it over the years because I sleep in the same position like a corpse. But what I find now is because that slight difference in elevation, if I have my knee hanging over it while I'm sleeping, I wake up, my knee is stiff as hell. It just hurts. It just hurts. What the hell is that? I just slept. How can I wake up sore? But here we are.
That's what I say. I'm like, I have no cool story to go along with this injury. I only went to sleep.
Yep. That's it, man. I like even with the gym, because dudes, we get a little bit of the ego with the lifting. And when I was younger, I used to lift, fairly heavy weights for a guy who wasn't obsessive and wasn't on gear. But again, clocking over to I'm 41 now, and I've just had to accept, man, there's some things we're not going to do anymore. We're not going to. I won't get into it, but yeah, you just have to accept things have changed, and I'm okay with that. And I'm not really, but I've accepted it all the same.
Yeah, don't pick up too heavy a weight because you don't want the bicep rolling up like a set of blinds up your arm. That's not a fun thing.
Oh man, the Instagram algorithm, because our Ghost Story guy's Instagram is crazy. We've hit something like 130,000 followers just on the strength of memes. I don't mind telling you, the Instagram is far more popular than the show. But when I'm scrolling that account, for some reason now it started throwing me bodybuilding stuff. But it's like bodybuilding fails. And those guys who, when they start to lock out their legs or lock out their knees on the leg press, and I'm just like, oh no, I can't look at this. I cannot, because I know what's going to happen. That knee's going to go the other way, and I cannot look.
Yeah, I'm the same way because it makes you cringe, and you like you get that hitch, and you're like, see, this is why I'm not supposed to be in the gym at this age. I'm so old. You're only as old as you feel. Okay, well, I feel pretty goddamn old. Okay, so,
Yeah, when it's damp out, man, I feel real old.
Yeah, it's a real thing, kids. Just wait. Y'all out there in your 20s or earlier listening, y'all just wait. That train's a-coming, baby. All right, so go ahead, Brennan.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, but don't worry, kids. Our shows are hip and relevant, so please listen.
Yeah, we want you to sit around.
Whoa. What is the Ghost Story guys has a tagline though, right? It's like your internet's creepy uncles or something.
No,
isn't that what you guys?
Uncles. The Instagram's like your favorite internet uncles telling you ghost stories.
Oh, I added creepy. Sorry, bro.
Yes, you added creepy.
That went a whole other direction. That's great.
Yeah. I meant Paul.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh yeah, we definitely meant Paul since he's not here to go. Hey, now wait just a second. All right, so let's talk about Fear Daily. Where did the idea come from? Let's talk about these bulletin board services. And I love the fact that you guys say right out of the gate, like, this is based in the 90s. I mean, it's one of the best decades that ever will be. I don't care what anybody says. So let's talk about Fear Daily.
Yeah, so basically, Brandon came to me in, I think, December of last year, and he said, I've got an idea. I kind of want to do a daily ghost show. And, because obviously with Ghost Story Guys, we tell stories, which we kind of curate from online and kind of clean up a little bit. And, we've got a massive archive in addition to what our listeners have sent. So that was sort of where we started. But as we began workshopping it in the beginning of the new year, this other sort of version of it kind of came out, which was like a fiction show. And this idea that again, like it sort of morphed over time. We went back and forth quite a bit, and it ended up with, like what if there was a reservoir of stories that was completely made up of people's real life encounters with the paranormal, but had been hidden away on a bulletin board from the 90s that no one had looked at anymore. And that's kind of where we landed in terms of concept. And I think it was kind of a really cool idea to sort of start playing around with, because the 90s was kind of the last decade where we felt like we had to kind of know everything, or sorry, where we were comfortable not knowing everything. So this idea of taking like all these stories in a place where like, oh man, we don't have to, you can get stuff wrong, or you can kind of, this person doesn't have to be like, oh, I can Google this and know the answer. And it sort of, it grew out of that, this like weird soup of, okay, but what if this, and what if we did it every day because we like to punish ourselves?
That was my addition. We're gonna do
Yes.
this every day. Yeah. I put him to that challenge right there. Hold my beer.
Yeah, and let everybody know what kinds of stories are found on the bulletin board services that you guys are pulling from for Fear Daily.
So basically, what we've done is like this: we've got stories of cryptids, serial killers, UFO encounters, shadow people, ghosts, like basically what you would hear on Ghost Story Guys, or what you might hear on Southern Gothic or Into the Fray, but set in the 90s and before, right? So you've got people, and again, just to be clear, this is all fictional, but some of these events did happen, or some of these things are based on real events. So, for example, I think it was 1994, there was this weird series of poisonings in and around Bakersfield, California. These people were taken to the emergency room, and when they were opened up, this gas escaped them, and the emergency rooms had to be evacuated and decontaminated by hazmat teams. So that is a true thing that happened, and it was eventually explained away as pesticide. But as far as I'm concerned, the answers I saw in the newspapers were not very compelling. I don't think that was the answer they want us to think it was. But I found that in a newspaper, and that became the story Gas. So they are, again, stories kind of spanning the entire paranormal spectrum, but fiction, or in some cases, fictionalized. So there's another story about a series of winged cryptid sightings down in Texas in the 70s, which was again reported in the news. And the story, I can't remember the name of that one, might be the Black Wings, but that has been again like sort of fictionalized into a first person account.
I think what's interesting about what Brennan's done though with all of that and connecting some of the normals, he's been doing real telling real ghost stories and been involved in this community for so long that now that when you go and you want to write a fiction story, it feels real because we've seen every possible cliche. We've seen every possible thing that somebody has said before. At this point, collected all these things over the years. So, we have such a firm footing in what people are actually describing that it's almost creepier what he's writing now because a lot of them really do feel like something you would read on Reddit, except for dated at this point in time. And and the way he's evolved by having to write so fast. Some of these stories are awful creepy. Very, very creepy. Actually, would be the way I'd put it.
Some of them too, like I'm trying to. Some of them are things I actually think about the world, but I've turned them into fiction. So like as you know, Shannon, I can't remember if we've talked about this. It's been a long time, I guess, but I'm very obsessed with missing people. In my life, I have known a surprising number of people who've gone missing. I've been told this is a surprising number, and I'm obsessed with that concept, and I've sort of had my own kind of weird journey with the missing 411 stuff and some of these sort of what are believed to be anomalous series of drownings in the Midwest, and which has now kind of spanned across into Western Europe as well. So I'm obsessed with that stuff, and So I've written some of that stuff in there. And again, I have my theories about what is causing those things. And so I've written some of that into these stories. You know, sometimes in oblique ways. It's not necessarily, no one says, for example, the smiley face drownings, but sometimes you'll hear there'll be a little bit of what I think is actually causing those things. Or, you know, there'll be cases like one of the things, another thing I'm kind of fascinated with is holes in the world, right? You know, there's that one case of the guy in, how was it, a state park in Colorado? He went missing. Everyone was looking for him. And this reporter went to go investigate the situation, kind of talk to the head ranger. Head ranger was busy. So he told the reporter, just take a little stroll. I'll be free in 15 minutes. So he or she, I can't remember which, they took this little stroll and they heard this guy calling for help. And supposedly they went to the head ranger and the head ranger said, yeah, no, we know. We just don't know where it's coming from.
Oh, Lord. What?
Yeah. Yeah. That's in one of the early 411 books before things kind of took a turn. And I'm sure you know, everyone knows what I'm talking about. But
I don't even remember that one. They couldn't find the dude, but they could hear him calling. That's,
Yeah. And there was another one where I think it was Australia. It was on YouTube. I saw this case where it was an elderly woman who walked the same route every day. And she walked the same route every day, was very together, very fit, you know, mentally very sound. One day she went missing and they were looking for her. And if I'm not mistaken, she called search and rescue to ask for help. And again, my memory of this it's been a little while, so maybe a little bit, I might be embellishing a bit, but if I remember correctly, she could even hear them looking for her, but they could not find her.
I mean, that's that
And
whole thing where, you know, I'm with you there, Brennan. The whole missing people thing is fascinating. And in some cases, it's truly unexplainable, but where they'll walk by a certain place time and time again, dogs, and they got the helos up and they have X amount of folks looking, professionals. And then, you know, a couple months later, they'll find a skull cap or a very large bone from that person that they were looking for right on the side of the trail.
yeah, I did a deep dive a few years ago of this sort of thing in and around Revelstoke, where I'm from. And I found several cases that just don't add up. There was one guy, he was supposed to meet his brother in a town south of Revelstoke, you know, at say noon. He didn't turn up. When the brother eventually couldn't reach him at all, he called the police. Police went to this guy's house. They found his car parked in front of the house with all his stuff in it, like he was, you know, like he had packed to leave, but they couldn't find him. So they brought out the dogs. They found nothing. A couple days later, they brought out the dogs again. They found the guy's body, I don't know, 200 feet away from the car in the bush. So, I mean, where the hell was he if he wasn't there? There was a snowmobiler up on the mountain. His truck was still in the base of the mountain when they opened it up the next morning. So they shut the mountain. They called out search and rescue. They flew overhead with the beacons all weekend. They tried to find this guy, nothing. So everyone said, okay, he must have fallen off his snowmobile in an avalanche, never had a chance to turn on his beacon. Within hours of opening the mountain, they found his body. His beacon was on.
It's just such a taunting thing. And you sharing that reminds me of one of my favorite missing 411 cases. And it's tragic, but it's the man that was found dead at the base of a tree. And they found his backpack full of survival gear. He had succumbed to the elements. And within the backpack, now it was in the middle of a river. I don't know how big the river was, but it was situated like sitting straight up on top of a boulder in the middle of this river that he could have easily gotten to, by the way. And everything that he needed to survive was sitting in that bag, and he was deceased right there within, eye shot of this thing. Like, what in the actual, now for both of you, really, for cases like that, what do you think is going on there?
Well, that's the thing. I genuinely don't know. Like, I think the explanation is either going to be much simpler than we think or much weirder than we think. And honestly, in cases like the ones I've described and others, I could go on about this for a very long time. I don't think there necessarily is a simple explanation, but I think there is sort of some hints in folklore. And as I mentioned, one of the shows we recently did on Ghost Story Guys was The Haunting of Serbia. And in order to do that, we had our researcher Brody. He found some stuff for me, but I also did a deep dive into Serbian Reddit with the help of my good buddy Google Translate. I actually found this account, and as soon as I did, I sent it over to Paul. I said, "Does this sound familiar?" And what it was is it was a story in Serbian folklore about this girl they call the Rainmaker. And essentially, she will take you. And if you are good or pure or whatever, then she will return you. And when she returns you, there will be a rainstorm. And when she, well, I should say rather, when she takes you, and returns you, there will be a rainstorm. And if you're not just or virtuous or whatever, then maybe you don't get to go back. But there's a rainstorm all the same. And of course, if you look at these stories, so many of them, these missing 411 cases or just generally anomalous missing persons cases, there is accompanying rain at the same time, like intense rain, unusual rain. It is fascinating that even in Eastern Europe, there is this old notion of being taken and rain kind of signifying that this has happened. Whether, who knows what is causing it, but there is a connection between people going missing, sometimes for lengthy periods, and rain. And in some of those cases I'm describing, they sound very much like fairy stories because you've got people being returned days, months, years later in some cases. Again, according to the stories, no time has passed for that person. And that's, again, this is a common piece of folklore across many different cultures, which makes me think there's something to it.
See, and that's terrifying because what constitutes the level of good? What is their idea of if you're good or bad?
Well, that's it. And honestly, I think that's just a way for people to try and make sense of it, right? Because we like to think, oh, well, if I survived, it must be because I deserved it. I must have deserved to survive. But genuinely, who knows? I mean, and I think if we're talking about something like this, I think we're talking about something that has an awareness and an understanding that is completely outside of our understanding. Like, I think it's bigger than us, and I think we can't wrap our heads around it.
I spoke to a young man a long time ago on Into the Fray. I don't know what number, but it was called The Muted Places. And he is from the Middle East, and they were out on some biological survey for snakes, I believe. I guess they're not afraid of snakes like Indiana Jones. So they were out for snakes, and he wandered into this area of this. It was a tall grass area in a valley somewhere. And he said all the sound went out. He was in eyeshot and earshot of this observation tower. And one of his fellow folks that were part of the program was up in that tower. Actually, there were two. He's calling to them, and they can't hear him. They're acting like they don't see him. He had been talking to them before he entered this quote-unquote muted place. And we hear this, right? This whole idea of the sound just dropping out or dimming down before even Bigfoot encounters, which at this point, that's a whole nother discussion. But is it Bigfoot? Is it something pretending to be a Bigfoot or blah, blah, blah? But regardless, he started to really get freaked out and stressed out. And eventually he was able to make his way back out. But by the time they could hear him, he's like, why in the actual hell were you guys not responding to me? And they're like, dude, we didn't see you, we didn't hear you, we don't know what you're even talking about. So that idea of these people that for whatever reason, and if those two people had wandered into that same place, would they have had that same experience, or was that tailored for him? You know what I mean? So this idea of imagine being lost and being maybe even right next to a guy with a dog that's searching for you, and you're like, dude, I'm right here, and they don't even They can't acknowledge you because they don't see you and don't hear you. That is terrifying.
Oh yeah. Well, and just to quickly was sort of one more digression about this, because again, I'm fascinated by this stuff. But when I was a kid, and I've told the story on Ghost Story Guys a number of times, but when I was a kid, my mom had to go to the hospital at some point. Don't remember why, but I would have been about maybe 5, maybe 4 or 5, something like that. It was a Sunday, so the family took us up to see her. I wanted to stay a couple extra minutes, so my grandfather said, okay, that's fine. We'll be down in the lobby. You remember how to get back down to the lobby. And it was, one, I was a precocious kid. 2, the Revelstoke Hospital only has 3 floors. So it's, not real big. It's a pretty small place. So after I left my mom, I went into the elevator, I hit the button. And when the doors opened again, I expected to see the hospital lobby. But instead, I saw what looked like the hospital lobby, but the color was wrong. It looked blue. Everything looked blue. It was like a memory of a place where even the sunlight is a memory. So the color, it was like light coming through blue glass is the best way I can describe it. And there was like the furniture that I expected to see, including the reception desk, but there was and this was like typewriter time, so there was typewriters, but the typewriters had dust covers on them. And I remember being really scared because I didn't understand what was happening. So I stood there for a while, and then the doors in front of me closed, and they opened behind me, and I heard my grandfather go, "Oh, there you are." And he grabbed my hand and, led me out. And I remember as we were leaving the hospital, I told him what had happened. And he just said, "Oh, well, when they built the hospital, they didn't have the money to use both sides of it, so the back half doesn't get used." And that was, I literally believed that for, I don't know, 20 years. I think it was 2017. I was listening to another paranormal show, and I flashed back to that memory. And I actually called my mom because she works at the hospital as a housekeeper. And I mentioned this to her, and I said, "So if I went down the elevator in the hospital back then, what does it open up to?" And she said, "Well, she said the back of the elevator opens up on the same thing it does now, which is the hallway to the operating room." And so I described what I'd seen to her, which I guess I'd never done before. And she said, "No, that there is nothing in the hospital that looks like that." She said the third floor is storage, but she said the elevator doesn't go to the third floor. So even that, it wouldn't have been that. So I thought, okay, well, that's weird. But then I was back in Revelstoke visiting some family about 6 months later, and Nick had met this woman who does psychic readings there. And she wanted me to go for one. So I thought, sure, what the heck. So I went, and I had a number of questions that she said, "Write down your questions, don't show them to me, but write down what some of the things you want to know from this, like some of the things you want this to teach you." So I wrote down a few things, but one of the things I wrote was what happened that day in the hospital. And according to the psychic, and I'm mixed on psychics, I have very kind of conflicted feelings on them. But one of the things she said to me was, "Your grandfather was here," and by this point, my grandfather had been gone for about 10 years. And she said, he asked, pardon me, "Your grandfather asked, do you remember when you were a little boy and you used to drift between dimensions?" So maybe that's what I saw. I don't know. But if that has any validity, it would certainly explain my obsession with these things.
Yeah, I was just watching. It's a year-old interview, but I've been digesting some of Sean Ryan's show, and he had Brandon Fugel on, the owner of the Skinwalker Ranch, and I've always kind of been like, I just didn't like the intro to that show. I feel like Brandon should have told them to not do the intro to that show. That way I just kind of stopped watching after that. But they really did him a disservice, because I watched that interview, and I just like Brandon now. I'm like, anyway, I could go on about stuff like that with TV. I'm sure that we all agree about things like that. But he, straight-faced, and many others do as well, talk about other dimensions. And it's just not something that should be just so easily snarfled at and giggled at, because there's definitely something going on. And in my mind, I'm like, just like with you in that hospital, what is the mechanism that sets something like that in motion and releases you from it, if it ever even does, obviously? Because it seems like in some of the 411 cases, they just don't come back. And we know that because they do get found deceased months or years later.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes wonder if it's almost, what's what I'm looking for, like arbitrary. Like I sort of, one of the visions I had once, I did a meditation on the whole thing, and the sort of the mental image that came to me, and this could just be me cooking this up, right? So who knows? I'm not exactly a rocket scientist with this stuff, but I got this vision of like a pole. Around the pole is like a series of circles, and each circle has a bunch of different lenses next to each other all the way around. The vision was like we look and we live through one lens all the way down the line. So it's like shining a laser through each of those lenses, which is lined up, and that's like our life. But sometimes maybe the lenses get misaligned, and we end up stumbling through one of these holes into a place that's actually not where we're supposed to be, because every natural system messes up sometimes, right? Like a rock will fall in the river, the river will flood. I mean, cancer is the body's natural system screwing up. So like every natural system has a flaw, and sometimes it self-corrects, and sometimes it doesn't. Maybe what we're experiencing is like this misalignment of lenses, and instead of kind of proceeding through the next one the way we're supposed to, we proceed through the one adjacent to it, and all of a sudden, shoot, we're not where we're supposed to be. And maybe if we're lucky, it corrects, and we're kind of like we pass back through before it corrects, so we can kind of then continue on the way we're supposed to. But maybe some unlucky folks, maybe it doesn't correct, or maybe it does, but it corrects before they have a chance to get back to where they need to be in order to continue with that correction, and they just get stuck. And I'm trying to, and that's kind of some of the stuff I'm trying to roll into fear, but without over intellectualizing it, right? Like, because you can't, you're telling us like a scary story, you can't sort of get into the weeds of like and lenses and all this stuff, because the people are just going to turn off. And we only have about, anywhere from 800 to 3,000 words depending on the length of the story. So, but these are kind of the feelings and the things I'm trying to roll into the stories we're telling, and sort of, again, because I actually think these things. I think it's possible. I think there's a lot going on in the world we don't understand. And sometimes I think the best way to communicate that to people is, as I'm learning, is to wrap it in kind of a fictional shell, which then makes the rest of it easier to digest.
Yeah, I've already consumed a few of the fear dailies, and they're awesome because I mean, Brandon and you, Brennan, you both have fantastic quote unquote radio voices, right? So it's easy to listen to, and the stories are captivating, and they're nice, perfect, bite-sized little treats for the day. It's not. And I'm guilty of it. I've aired really long shows, and people are like, "Good Lord, woman, I guess I'll take 3 days to listen to this episode." So, no, I really do enjoy it. And okay, so before I wanted to ask, of course, a couple of Brennan's already shared one or two, but personal encounters, because Brennan, let's continue with you before I zip over to Brandon for this, because it has been a couple of years before, or since you've been on ITF, I think. I don't know when the last time you came on. It's been a while. Have you
been a few years.
anything odd or paranormal occur maybe since the last time that we've spoken?
Yeah, I mean, it's happened less, definitely, because back when I was doing the show with Ian, we were working in my old office. I used to work for a consulting company as an office manager. That building was haunted AF. Like, not just haunted. I actually was contacted by someone who kind of explained it to me, and they said this is on like a pathway of some kind. So you've got something resident, which is kind of like an elemental type thing. It's never been human, but it's benign. But there is something else that comes through, and that thing that comes through is very chaotic and very unpleasant. We felt that. I mean, we would have recording sessions where sometimes we would actually see things like flitting around the office. Not often, but it would happen. Once I moved out of there, it happened less. It felt like that was almost like marinating that environment kind of sensitized me to receiving these things in a way that I'm not quite as sensitive to now, because I'm not in there. Like, one great example of what happened when I was in there, and again, I may have told the story on the show before, but it's been a long time, I'm not sure. The building, which is here in Victoria, it's in Bastion Square, which is a very famously haunted part of the city. The building didn't like to be talked about. So I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine he's from another town, and I started telling him about some of the spooky stuff that had been happening in the building. And without fail, every time I started to talk about these things, we'd lose connection. It would get snowy, it would cut out. But if I changed the subject mid sentence, then it would be fine. Finally, towards the end of the conversation, we started getting a lot of line noise, and then this voice broke in, and I thought it was my cousin. And it sounded like this. It sounded like that. And it kept going. So finally, I just hung up. I called him back. I said, "Sorry, dude." I said, "You broke up. What were you saying?" And he said, "I thought that was you." So strange, but I mean, they're iPhones, digital cell, not impossible. Could have been someone breaking in, fine. However, that night, I was driving around with a different friend. It was about 1 a.m. We were just driving around listening to the police scanner. And all of a sudden, mid announcement, the dispatch was saying something like, go here, whatever. We got a 211 on such and such a street. Mid broadcast, it cut out. And as I was telling my friend about this story, a voice broke in, and it laughed exactly like this. Exactly, like deeper and creepier, but that's what it sounded like. And then the dispatch cut back in. No one on the police band reacted whatsoever. That was the kind of thing that would happen in that old building. And again, I've been out of there now. I think the consulting company closed in 2018. We had some weird stuff happen when we moved into a jam band space for a couple of years. But recently, I think the most dramatic thing that's happened recently was when I was living in Montreal. A friend of mine took me for a drive one night. After I got back, I was staying in an apartment downtown. I had two roommates, which that's a whole other paranormal experience, or maybe abnormal experience. They're all 20 and very unpleasant. But I was in my room and I had a gorgeous view of downtown Montreal. I had the best possible view. I still dream about it. It was wonderful. So I'm laying in bed, watching the city go by. I think it was on the 28th floor. I passed out and I had a nightmare. I don't remember exactly what the nightmare was, but when I woke up, there was a hooded figure standing over me, and completely black, completely shadowed, which should not have been possible given the light coming in from just the general cityscape to my left, but it was completely dark. And I remember I gasped, and as I gasped, this shadow figure sucked back into the closet. Like the scene in Poltergeist with the house?
Mm-hmm.
Like that, just right back into the closet. I had not seen a shadow person since, I don't know, 2013, 2014, not that close. And I would say that's probably like the most, I think there have been things, but that's definitely the most dramatic. I haven't seen anything since then. There certainly have been odd feelings or dreams, which have kind of proven to be true in a weird way, sort of shared sensations, stuff like that. But actually seeing something, I would say was maybe October or November 2022 in Montreal.
So that shadow figure that you saw, just like you said, it just seemed like, well, why are you here now? Have you thought about why he would have been there at that time? Was there anything going on? Are you extra stressed at that time? Not that I need, we need any details, but have you thought about that?
Oh yeah, I was in bad shape. When I moved to Montreal, I was in pretty bad shape. Just again, like physically, mentally, spiritually. The preceding 2 years had just beaten the crap out of me because of course, we all went through stuff with the pandemic. I I fired Ian in December 2020. So that was its own thing. I had to get through that. It was an unpleasant experience, just not only just personally, but because obviously the audience didn't understand what was happening. I had taken a trip to Los Angeles that summer with my wife and her brother and his kids and her mother, which was, it's nice to see them, but I was again not in great health. My feet were really messed up and I was driving everyone. So I was just for a period of months, I was in constant foot pain until, I managed to see a podiatrist who helped me kind of figure everything out. But so I was just mental pain, physical pain, spiritual pain. I think that had a lot to do with it. And also the city we drove through, and I'm blanking on the name, but we drove through a little town on the lake just outside of Montreal, and it is also famously haunted. So I think that had something to do with it. Yeah. Actually, I just remembered there was one other paranormal thing that I could probably throw out there. So I live in London, Ontario now most of the time. I work it from home, obviously doing the podcasting, but sometimes it's nice to have somewhere else to go. So I got a membership in a co-working space. And I won't say where it is because it's run by a very nice person. And I said I would never. She said, "Don't ever tell me if my place is haunted." I'm like, "All right, agreed," because it turns out it is. And one night I worked there quite late, and most of the time I always work in the south side of the building at night. Never thought about it much, just always gravitated there if I turned up late. And then one night I was working there. I'd started in the mid-afternoon, and I was on the north side of the building, and just stayed there. Stayed there because I was just working on stuff. I was in the zone. And then sunset, I didn't think too much about it, but I started feeling funny. And I just thought, I don't know why. I just feel funny. Something doesn't feel right. And I sat there a little while longer. And then I realized, I think there's something here. Like it feels like there's a presence here. And I don't think it's very happy with me. And just then I got a text from my friend and she was just going to bed. She goes, "Hey man, are you okay?" I said, "Why?" She goes, "I feel like you're in danger of some kind." And I was like, "Oh, well, funny you say that." And I explained what I had just sensed to her, and she goes, "Oh yeah, you got to get out of there." So I packed my stuff up, left that part of the building, and I remembered I had all my factor meals. I had one of those subscription boxes. They were all in the fridge at this co-working space, so I had to go downstairs and get them out before I could leave. And dude, it felt like whatever was up there, it felt like it was walking behind me the entire time I was crossing the building and getting my stuff out of the fridge. And I tell you, I have not yet, I've never again hung out in that part of the building. And certainly basically after the sun sets, I don't even enter through the door nearest to that side anymore because it feels like, no, that belongs to something else. And whatever it is not happy. And then I found out because the building is sort of part residential, I found out that there's a very unhappy dude whose bedroom is over there. And so I don't know if whatever's in there is making him unhappy or his unhappiness has drawn whatever that is, but that was a bad deal.
Yeah, I would say she probably doesn't want to know about that.
No, I have not shared that with her.
Close your ears and la 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 if you come across this. All right, so sorry, go ahead, Brennan.
Oh no, I was just gonna say nothing worse than the ghost guy who comes in and screws everything up for you.
They're just attracted to you. I mean, you can't help it. You're a beacon.
There we go. God help me.
It just wants to be in your next book. That's all. He wants to be famous.
Oh boy, do I have bad news for you, Ghost.
Brennan, what about you? Did you become interested in all this from having your own experiences?
No, I didn't. I feel like I'm the bridesmaid, never the bride. When it comes to a lot of this stuff, I got interested in it from, I grew up down in New Orleans, so it was just so embedded in culture, everywhere you went and everything. But I actually came to this type of thing because my parents were avid genealogists, and this was pre-internet, without telling you exactly when, how old I am. This was pre-ancestry.com. And so we spent a lot of time in cemeteries of all places growing up. No joke, as like a 8, 10-year-old, that kind of, and so it kind of, the stories of all this stuff really fascinated me. A good cemetery where it's like every few feet you walk, there's a whole lifetime of stories underneath that headstone. And that's where the genesis of my interest came, because of that. But I say that, and most of what I've experienced through the years has always been in relation to when we tell stories. I feel like we've kind of developed this relationship with some of the people and some of the stories that we've told that weren't told before, if that makes sense. If you're out and you were doing a ghost tour on the street and you really are trying to tell the story well and be honest with it, it feels like that's when most people are interacting with whoever that is or whatever that entity might be, seems to be more prone to actually see something, to feel something, and those locations I was telling you about where, folks have physical sensations when they go inside, and all of that always seems to be more attached with how connected I can be in telling the story. But over the years, we've had a couple of these things where we've gotten really a really deep fascination with this one individual from down in Manchac Swamp outside of New Orleans, a woman by the name of Julia Brown, and she passed away in 1915, but excuse me, she was born enslaved in Louisiana, and married her husband, and her husband fought for the U.S. Army during the Civil War. He was part of the U.S. colored troops, and they gave him some land out in the swamp for them to go move out to, right? And he just got 40 acres for his service. And but of course the land's in the middle of this German community. They're blonde hair, blue eyes, and they're harvesting cypress trees. So, here's this kind of small black family in the middle of the swamp. There's no roads there or anything. And the story goes that, she became this midwife and she knew voodoo and all this, and she was helping the community, with the medical things and things of that nature, like a root worker, right? And this was early 1900s, so it wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things. And the story goes, for years, people said that at some point, this relationship with the community, Julia Brown, it started to sour, probably after her husband passed away. I just started to get a little bad, and whether she felt taken advantage of by these people who just thought that she would practice, for her, help them, whatever. Maybe she got older and was, whatever the reason, folks said they'd go out to her place and they would see her sitting there and in her rocking chair on the porch of this little swamp cabin singing this song, "When I die, I'll take the whole town with me." And what happened was a few years later, after folks started saying this was going on, she passes away from old age, and at her funeral, and this is very pressing, even or very very interesting that I'm telling you even this story right now with what's going on with the weather here. But at her funeral, it is documented in newspapers that as the entire town shows up for her funeral, for what you can imagine, whatever the reason, they might be afraid that this curse that they've been cursed and they better go appease her spirit. They're at this small house out in the swamp, and all of a sudden the wind starts to pick up and the rain starts pouring while they're in the middle of this funeral for this woman they believe is practicing voodoo. And the largest storm comes through Southeast Louisiana prior to us naming storms. There's a category 4 storm and demolishes this town that still isn't there to this day, just absolutely decimates it. And so, for years, people have told this story. And when TV shows came out, it started kind of popping up in some places. And the story is always that Julia Brown cursed this town. She cursed this small town and was mad at them. And she became this evil voodoo practitioner. And there's even a weather channel. There's a paranormal weather channel show a while back called Supernatural or something like that. And it was, of course, it just portrayed, had her cackling, laughing out in the swamp and like evil voodoo priestess. And we got really in depth with looking up who this woman was and going back in the research and doing all this stuff and finding her in census records and finding, old newspaper articles about it. And we kind of like uncovered that this woman that had become this vicious entity, in reality, everyone who lived there that had been interviewed, had this belief that she wasn't a voodoo priestess, but she just had this foresight that something bad was about to happen, and she was trying to warn them all, and that she was actually this very kind-hearted woman. And so, we started telling this story a few years ago, and every time we'd tell this story, we felt like we'd have these odd occurrences happen, and these things would happen that would kind of like feel like this little nod, like she was watching out. And it all culminated a few years back. My sister, as I mentioned, she's does, historic research. She's an archivist. My sister had gotten so enthralled by this tale and trying to tell the story of this individual as a human that she sent a article in to be published in this journal about Julia Brown. So she gets there's I believe it was Hurricane Isaac. I can't remember the hurricane it was. She still lives down in New Orleans, and literally the day before the hurricane comes, she gets an email saying this article's been accepted into this thing. And that night she goes to stay at my parents' house, and because the storm's going to come through, it comes through. There's no electricity for like weeks after this. It was a big deal, a big storm, but she finally goes home a few days later. And of course, there's like a giant branch from this giant oak tree has toppled over her fence and everything. It's crushed all this stuff, and it is 2 feet from her bedroom. And and my sister just continues over and over again, and we've had these patterns where we've found these things where we feel like this kind of relationship, with this individual that we're promoting or talking about or really trying to set straight is kind of interacting with us and letting us know we're on the right path or something of that nature. And that's where most of the things that really start getting under, I don't want to say get under my skin, but really lead me to believe that we're doing something that's positive in that way. But just recently, actually, I am working on or wrapping up a project for an episode that's coming out this week called The Battletown Witch, and it's a really tiny piece of local lore from this Meade County, Kentucky, Battletown, Kentucky, a very rural county. There's only less than 100 people live there right now. It's not even incorporated, right? And for almost 200 years, they've told this story about this young woman who was a witch, and she's has the unfortunate designation as being the only woman in America to be burned alive for being a witch. And there's a horrible story, horrible tale. There's a small cemetery out there of how the community just thought she was causing problems and all of this stuff. And when I took on this project, because I'm working with the folks out in Meade County on the project, and they kind of said something early on. They're like, "Hey, just so we always have problems when we start getting into this, and the the older lady who wrote the book on it, literally wrote the book on it. She's telling me stuff like, oh, I went to publish the book, and and of course we lost the manuscript like 4 times. The publisher lost, we'd all this. And I was kind of like, okay, all right, I get it. I'm technologically sound. This is you guys, this is coincidence stuff, and they kept warning me, man. And I tell you, and Brennan can attest to this. I have had the worst week trying to get this project out over the last 2 or 3 weeks. I was going to interview someone from Kentucky about the project. We had a meeting set, and I got on Google Maps, and I like to get on Google Maps and do that Google Earth thing where you go around the area, and I really want to get a vibe. Like, what does it look like down there by this cemetery that she purportedly haunts, and what is the vibe of this community, so I can really make sure. And I get on there, and just everything skits out, just goes crazy on my computer right as I get to that little road that goes down the cemetery, which you couldn't even go down, and just started doing wildest stuff. And I ended up having to postpone the interview for an hour and apologize. And the lady's like, man, I told you so. Like, look, this isn't like I wasn't joking. This really is real. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm there. And then, a week later, I was putting together, I almost at the very end, the episode, I was producing the episode, doing all the sound design or everything. And sure enough, I close up my laptop at the office and come home, go to pull it up and give it a listen, and the files are all corrupted. And I had to go back and I lost about, 4 hours trying to figure it out, lost about an hour of work using backup files, stuff like that. It was a constant stream of things. The internet went down one day, 2 days later, when I was going to interview another person from Meade County, and it's stuff I've never had happen before. So I think that there's these relationships with some of the folks, and those are the ones that I feel like impact me the most, as opposed to some of the stuff on the ghost tours that feel like fairly typical kind of, if you go to a haunted place, some disembodied sounds and things like that, unexplainable. So, but again, I would love to see a shadow man, Brennan. And I say that, I mean, like, I have been to Waverly Hills so many times because they keep promising me I'm going to see something, and I have yet to come across an apparition or something. And it is, maybe I have the wrong energy because I am dying for it so much, and have attempted that so many times. But that's most of where I come from with it. Yeah.
So that was going to be my next question, is what would that, so that would be the very one thing that, and you would know that that's what it was. It wasn't another person's actual shadow or pareidolia like we were talking about earlier. You could verify that it was something very, very strange. It would be a shadow person.
I think that's the one that, like, my mind has set that would be the thing that would probably be like indisputable in my mind, if that makes sense. Like, that would be like the shadow person. I've had some friends talk about it before, and been to places like that, and and what an apparition is. We talked earlier about photographs, things like that. In no way, shape, or form am I skeptical, but I there's this thing about shadow people, and not waking up in the night, seeing it, being fully conscious, that I just want to have this experience, to feel this confirmation that that we're not all crazy, that this really is real. And I think that's the experience I'm dying for.
So
Well,
if you could just really quick, if you could though delineate from, okay, you're going to have that experience, but you'll be awake. Would you rather have it
Yeah.
to where you have gone to a location that then you can leave and you can go home? Home is cool. Home is clear. Or would you be okay with it being standing in your kitchen and you have to worry about seeing it wherever you
Again.
might see it? Yeah. Or your 10-year-old
Yeah.
seeing it.
Oh man, yeah. I tell you, it's that's an interesting question, because I joke a lot. I haven't really, none of it's really made me scared to deal with a lot of it. I joke that I'm more scared of aliens than anything, but it's like, that's the body horror that really creeps me out. But I don't know. I don't know what it would look like if it were there, because I've never felt that intrusion at home before with any of this stuff. I've never felt that any of the things that I've ever been around that have had that paranormal, that experiential angle to it has always been out in it's always been somewhere else. So I probably can't answer that, and probably have to think about that. And maybe I'll change my mind on wanting to see this shadow person if I really were to think that way. I tell you what though, I would not want to wake up to it. I'll give you that.
Well, and see,
think that's a good
Brennan's
idea.
encounter that he just shared is
Yeah.
that's one side of it, and then my own is the total opposite. Seeing 4 shadow figures running in the woods, and I don't live in the
Yeah.
woods, so I'm not a Bigfoot, so I didn't have to go back there if I didn't want to. I
Yeah.
still was scared to sleep in the cabin for a couple of nights because it was just down the road from it, but that's something that just comes up over and over on the show is invading the personal space and having to worry about where did you come from, why won't you leave, what do you want, is the big glaring obvious thing. And I do appreciate that Brennan was honest in saying that was a really stressful bad time for him. He was in physical pain and he's going through all these things, and that is a narrative that comes up over and over again. I know that you guys have both heard that, right? Like doing any kind of research, you find that these things are attracted to darkness, much like the woman that doesn't want to know that her building is extremely haunted. And maybe that guy that's this angry, he's butthead or whatever, maybe he's really genuinely not a good person. Maybe he's done really bad things. I do wonder sometimes if that's him astral traveling somehow. I know that's getting like way woo, but that just pops into my head. That's been something lately that has come up a lot, and I don't know why. It's like the OBE, the astral travel. I'm like, is that how much of shadow people are actually this replay of residual haunting energy or something demonic or dark, the D word, demonic, or is it us? Is it us just there goes Bobby astral traveling again. Oh God, I did my accent.
Well, I don't mean to circle back and segue into plugging, but I think what's been fascinating about reading Brennan's stories, he's written, I think he's written over almost 150 at this point, and reading all these things that he's written in fiction and how they touch every single one of these things that we've been talking about and kind of present that. He's had one that was astral projection. He's had one that has been, there was a story that he wrote that was really interesting, that it was somebody had a ghost where they worked, or several actually. There's 2 I can think of, that it felt comforting to know that this person was there and to have that experience versus, what his personal experience and it being anxiety inducing. And there's such a wide array of factors that go into that, and I know the exploration of that is probably what keeps us so involved in this. Is we're never going to have an answer, right?
No, we won't, but the search sure is fun, right? And if anyone says they're an expert, you run very fast. As fast as you can in your 40-something body if you're where we are.
I was going to say, we had this conversation. Well, I'll gradually stroll and ache.
Yeah, I'll drive as fast as my little hatchback will take me.
Yeah, we'll roll if we have to get away from that kind of a thing. But so, you guys have shared quite a bit about Fear Daily, and you've already covered a little bit about not only the upcoming, but what has been covered so far. But is there one that you guys have written and executed and shared on Fear Daily that sticks out, and either one of you can answer this, as maybe a favorite that you guys came up with it, and like you said, Brennan, all of this comes from places of what people claim are fact, and that we all know this weird stuff is really out there. But is there one that sticks out to you guys that has aired so far in the episodes?
I bet it's the same one, Brennan. It's the same one.
There's the one that won't air because you
you
guys are too woke.
Oh, we had one that felt a little too far, and everybody had a little creepy feeling, like maybe this one's a little too rough. And Brennan was like, maybe it's not. And then his copy editor, that helps him with writing, she was like, maybe it is. And then I kind of read, I was like, maybe it is. And then the audio editor's like, maybe it is. Like, all right, well, maybe we found a line. Maybe if all 4 of us, if it was like,
Right.
if it was half and half, that's good. But we were all just enough to be nervous. But I bet when the question you're asking, I'd love to hear what Brennan's going to say, because he is such a person, but I bet it might be the same story that we think of.
Oh man. I'll be honest, I have only listened to a few of the finished stories because I have a really hard time hearing my own work. All I can hear is the shit that I didn't do properly. I
Mm-hmm.
apologize. I'm like, oh man, I screwed that up, or I should have phrased this differently. So I haven't heard a lot of the production. What I have heard is, of course, incredible, which is no surprise. I think of the ones I've heard, The Day That It Didn't Rain is probably the best in terms of the production, like the combination of words and production. Although Red Time is,
Really?
yeah, that's up there because Red Time was a story. I mean, like it's not exactly an original idea, the sort of this notion of a kid show that only comes on sometimes, only at night, only to certain people. Like that's old school creepypasta stuff. But some of the when I wrote it, like some of the specific images, kind of I was queasy after I wrote it, and I was kind of like, I wish I
Yeah.
hadn't written this. So that one, I think that's like one of the more sort of weird ones. But Day It Didn't Rain, that one too, like because I wrote that after nearly getting banged up in a car accident on my way home from that co-working space in a crazy storm, just an insane storm in southern Ontario. And then I think Wreck of the Santa Maria.
Oh, that one's not out yet, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That I like that. I wrote that one entirely. It's based on the Trooper song Santa Maria, which has nothing to do with the story whatsoever. But I was driving back from. I went to Brett Manning's. Oh, was it? What is it? The Goblin Market down in Indiana. On the way back, I was listening to nothing but Trooper and AC/DC, and Santa Maria stuck in my head. Yeah, wrote a story about it. Again, has nothing to do with the Trooper song, but I just again it deals with some of my favorite kind of weird topics. But I'm really curious to hear what you think, Brandon.
I expect you to say another one. Red Time probably is one of the weirdest, creepier ones we have. And I really enjoyed doing the sound for that because I think I had a lot to work with to make it interesting. What I thought you were going to say actually is the same episode as The Day It Didn't Rain, Night Hunting. It's Brennan has found since it's kind of everything's a timepiece, right? Brennan really leaned into on some of this stuff that had to do with the issues that you would have dealt with as a child, kind of at that point in time. Like if you were posting on this board, then you were probably a child in the 80s, late 70s. And this night hunting episode was kind of about somebody dealing with a father who came back from Vietnam messed up. And it just had a really realistic feeling in terms of kind of the anxiety of dealing with that as a child mixed with a missing person, of course, at the same time. And that one really, I just thought it was a beautifully done story that captured both this supernatural element and this real anxiety to it. But clearly, as we're finding, Fear Daily is just a way that Brennan is exercising all of his demons and not going to therapy.
You are
Is
not
the
wrong.
is really apparently that's what I didn't realize how much of this was every time something knocks Brennan off course, he writes a story about it, and we're better for it apparently. So
Yeah, there's a story. It's not out yet. It's coming out in October, I think. I can't even remember what it's called, but I wrote it because I woke up one morning at my place back east with I think I got a spider bite in my sleep, and it was like three of them in like one tiny area of my shoulder, and it hurt like a bugger. And I just couldn't. I was using the wrong remedy to get it to go down, so it just was not going away, and I was getting kind of freaked out about it. And I wrote that into a story about, again, I can't remember what it's called, but I wrote that into a story, and it goes a much different way than mine did. Mine, I just got some antibiotic cream and I was fine. But for this guy in the story, it goes all the way bad. And yeah, it is. It's very much a way for me to explore. And I'm kind of realizing that. I was saying that to Brandon the other day. It's like I'm realizing, oh yeah, this is a lot of it is me kind of exploring growing up in a working class town in the 90s, because I was 7 when the 90s rolled over. And so I have all these memories of the way people were, the way kids were, and I've done a ton of research, right? Like I'm always doing, I'm always going to vintage shops to look for magazines and postcards and letters and periodicals and to try and find like people and things that are not online, right? Because there's so much information. One of my other favorite stories is called Memories of Rhyolite. I wrote that story because I found this pamphlet in a bookshop here in Victoria down in the very bottom shelf, and it was called Memories of Rhyolite. And it was this guy writing like 60 pages about the time he spent living in Rhyolite, Nevada in like 1910 or something. I wrote like I made my character that guy not that guy, but like the sort of similar to his story, like this, he came in this way because of these reasons, but obviously adapted it for my purposes and added in sort of like an underground, almost like a Tommyknocker element, because these guys are obviously there to mine. That is sort of nothing, that doesn't really have any like personal stuff for me, but just in terms of like a place that I think would have been completely, maybe not forgotten about, but wouldn't have a huge part of the digital record, is now kind of rolled up into one of these stories. And again, a lot of that, I didn't even have to do the hard work in coming up with characters, because there were some fantastic people just living in Rhyolite at that time. But yeah, it's a combination of therapy and just Bren. You can almost track what I'm reading by the stories. Like there's a story about Major League Baseball or minor league baseball. I was reading a book about minor league baseball. There's a story about, I just finished reading a book about a truck driver. There's a story about a truck driver in there. I've got one sort of in the kind of cooking, that's going to be about driving truck in Vietnam during the war, which, like the basic outlines and details will come from that. So it's both like me working through my childhood stuff and just this weird voyage through wherever my strange interests happen to take me.
Next up is the serial killer that lives upstairs in the building that you're working in. How about that?
Well, I mean, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of the story we cut. The story we cut was a serial killer who was.
There are serial killer stories. There are a few. This one just was a little. This one was, a little too.
Yeah, I was listening to the Behind the Bastards series on Andrew Tate, and I was like, what if a serial killer was like both very dangerous but also just a complete sad piece of garbage? And can't imagine where I got that thought from listening to that series of episodes.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyways, it was a little too real, we'll say.
Well, all I know is I need to now go find Red Time and listen to that, because it made you queasy to write it, huh? That's interesting.
Yeah, every now and again you'll write something, or I'll write something. I'm like, man, I wish I hadn't made this. Like it just, you think, I don't know, there's something about the act of creation. I wrote that one late at night in the co-working space I was talking about, and it was one of those things where I finished it back at home, and I just like, man, we're going to use it because we have to, because we got to need a lot of these stories, but something about this makes me feel gross.
Well, and can I just say, Brennan, and I've sent Brennan a few different projects of mine. I'm not really a writer. I don't even particularly like it, to be honest, and I'm okay to say that. Yeah, I got a couple books out with Jeff, but that is the truth. I don't mind to say that. Brennan is just an incredible writer, so talented. It just comes very naturally for him. And when he would make his suggestions, I'm like, it's so crazy just what two different brains will come up with, and how much better your brain is at doing what I was trying to do. So you are very talented.
Well, thank you very much. And on Fear, again, I'm lucky enough to be working with Brandon and have him kind of bouncing off and bouncing off ideas and refining stuff with me. Like a great one, just as we sort of wind down, we were talking about this the other day. I wrote a story that, and sometimes if you're listening to Ghost Story Guys regularly, you might recognize certain events, because in some cases what I've taken like paranormal events from one story and then just kind of had those riffed on that, but in a completely different setting with different outcomes. One of them I set in a little town outside New Orleans, and because I knew that's Brandon's stomping grounds, like that's where he's from, I couldn't screw up at least like the location details. And so I did what I could, try to nail that down. Did the same thing he did, actually. I walked around it on Google Maps. Sometimes I'll go through like old community Facebook groups and kind of look for people's memories of a place and fill in, like use those details to kind of extrapolate certain things. But there was something I just couldn't have known, and he nailed it. He sent me a message afterwards. And why don't you tell Brittany? Tell better than I do.
Oh, no, it's just little pieces that only local people know, So he's kind of said something, this guy kind of is pulling into the house after going and getting groceries. And it's like, well, if you're from down there, you don't get groceries, you make groceries, So it's just little tweaks that have made these things more real. And, obviously, Brennan was saying, he's getting in old magazines and stuff. And so it's been fun seeing how people have responded to that when these little kind of pieces that are out of nowhere come in. And he's good at this stuff, man. This is Brennan's show. I just get to make it for him.
Oh, no.
Well, that said, though, the sound design, Brandon, you said that you do, and I will say it adds a fantastic, very much needed and wonderful layer to the whole thing.
Oh yeah. No, go ahead, Brandon.
I was going to say, if I was just reading those things, no one would give a rat's ass. But having him read them, doing the production he does, that's what makes the stories come alive. Because otherwise, it's just, I've written a lot of stuff, but though like the narration and the sound design is what make them fear daily.
You can't make it 90s without making it sound a little bit like somebody who listened to way too much Nine Inch Nails in the 90s.
Heck yeah.
A little gloss over the top.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing.
Well, that said, let everybody know and plug everything. So, Brennan, talk about the tour again real quick and Franklin, and Brennan, bring up your book again and the fact that the audiobook's coming out. Awesome. And of course, where to find Fear Daily.
Yeah, well, if you Southern Gothic is available on all your podcast apps. We're on YouTube as well, Spotify, everything you can get on there. Check that out. This upcoming, let's see, on September 30th, Monday, September 30th, that Battletown Witch I just told you about will be airing. I'm excited about that story. Of course, this year I actually will not be doing tours down there in Franklin, but I am doing a live show where I'll be telling ghost stories at iNTO Nashville here. That is on October 17th, and you can come out, have a cocktail, and hear some ghost stories and hang out with a bunch of weirdos like us. That's going to be, that's southerngothicmedia.com. You can click on the live tag and you can get tickets, come out there. I think that's everything I'm doing right now. Brennan, what you got going on?
Well, got Ghost Story Guys, of course, once a week, every Tuesday. Me and Paul will either be telling you true life stories of the strange and unusual, or we will be interviewing someone very cool or talking back to our audience. And you'll find that everywhere fine podcasts live. Again, that's the Ghost Story Guys, or at ghoststoryguys.com. You can also follow us on Instagram as the Ghost Story Guys and watch some of our incredibly twisted sense of humor play itself out over the course of that particular feed. And then, my book is A Strange Little Place, The Paranormal Secrets of Revelstoke, British Columbia. That is available on Amazon through Beyond the Fray. And again, the audiobook version of that will be going into production. Well, it's done. I'm waiting for one last piece. And then that should be out probably within a month. So keep an eye out on Amazon for that. And that is 5.5 hours of paranormal goodness from my hometown of Revelstoke, BC.
And don't forget, you can find Fear Daily at the top of all the charts because I did sell my soul for this to be successful. So you just check out
I knew it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Fear Daily on podcast platforms everywhere or at feardaily.com. And you can get ad-free versions of all the episodes through our Supercast, which is also linked at feardaily.com.
Well, thank you both, gentlemen, for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having us, Shan. It's been good to catch up.
Thanks for having us.